Hi, Penny Lane with Penny Lane U and JobCosting.com. In this video, we're going to talk about the catalog items, the cost codes, and the integration with QuickBooks Online. Let's get started with our catalog items. Over on the side menu, if you click on Catalog, you're going to see your cost catalog. Cost catalog items are the items that are used in building budgets, usually in cost groups. Cost catalog items can be as simple as just exactly the same as your cost codes to a lot more complicated, down to the individual lumber and hardware level. Either way totally works, and cost catalog items can do all kinds of fancy stuff when it comes to estimating. We're going to stay focused on the integration factors. What is important is that every catalog item is mapped back to a cost code. If the catalog item is not mapped back to a cost code, it doesn't have any way to communicate with QuickBooks, and the integration will fail because QuickBooks does not see the catalog items. QuickBooks and JobTread talk to each other through the cost code. So if my catalog item that's on my budget is not mapped back to a cost code, I'm going to have an integration failure. Your catalog items are also mapped back to a cost item type. The cost item type plays a fairly limited role in JobTread. Let's talk about it. If we go to the settings and we go to job costing, we'll see our cost item types here. You can create as many cost item types as you need, but I recommend keeping them pretty simple. Really, the purpose of cost item types is to specify what is the default markup on that item when you put it on a budget. Is it time trackable? So can your employees see it when they clock into the job? Which is important because we don't want our employees to clock into materials or see everything that's on the budget. And also, do you charge your customer sales tax? Theoretically, since all of these cost items have the same parameters except for the labor, we could just have two cost item types. But one of the other things that you can do with your cost item types is you can look at a budget view by cost type, which is kind of fun. Some people like to have the option to look at their budget in the really big picture view by cost type. Let's talk about cost codes. If I want to add a new cost code to JobTread, first of all, in my initial setup, I can import the cost codes, or I can ask JobTread to import my cost codes for me. But if I need to set up an individual cost code, I can just come down here to the bottom. I type it in, click plus new, and I've got a new cost code. So that's how you add a cost code manually. Now let's go into the integration with QuickBooks Online of the cost codes. Go to settings, then go to integrations, then QuickBooks Online. Let's go to our product service mapping. This is where all of the magic happens. You're going to notice that we have default invoice and bill items, and this is just to prevent sync errors. In case there's some kind of problem with the item, the sync will not fail. The cost plus fees item, if you want the markup that's on your cost plus jobs in JobTread to land in a very specific income account in QuickBooks, like markup income, then you can set up a product or service in QuickBooks and map it back to that income account and then set that up here. Also want you to notice this little autofill button. One piece of magic is if I do have the exact same JobTread cost code and QuickBooks product or service, if they're the same, I can, during my initial integration, I can come in here and click autofill, and JobTread will automatically fill out this QuickBooks product or service side of the mapping. Speaking of which, you're going to notice that I have a one-to-one JobTread cost code and QuickBooks product or service set up here. And that is not necessary. It is what I prefer, and it is important if you're going to be entering any of your cost transaction like bills or expenses over in QuickBooks Online. Because if I don't have the framing materials product or service over in QuickBooks Online to record my cost to, then I don't have any way of recording it back to the correct line item on the budget. So if I'm entering my costs in QuickBooks Online, it's really critical that I have a product or service that matches every cost code in JobTread. I also want to speak to the cost code setup here. You're going to notice that I have an example of very simple cost codes where I just have one cost code for each phase of the project, and then a little bit more complicated where I have framing labor and framing materials set up separately. There are a couple of reasons why you might want to set this up simpler or in more detail. Number one, for job costing in JobTread. So for your budget and job cost reports, do you want to see your framing on one budget line item? Materials, labor, sub, it's all just in one line item in JobTread? Or do you want to see what you budgeted for framing materials versus what the framing materials actually cost you versus the labor or subcontract, and see that level of detail on your job cost budgets in JobTread? The other reason is for the QuickBooks Online account mapping. So let's dive into that real quick. In QuickBooks, if you go to your gear icon and then you go to products and services, you'll get to your products and services list. Here's our framing labor, framing materials, framing subcontractor. So the thing is, this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of actually impacting our financial statements. If I have one cost code and one product or service item in QuickBooks Online called framing, I get to choose one cost account to map that to. And in fact, it's important that I map every product or service in QuickBooks Online to both an income and a cost of goods sold account. That's why we can't map to the chart of accounts directly, because we actually use this one cost code to record two types of transactions. Sales transactions, customer invoices, come into QuickBooks from JobTread with every cost code line item on the invoice. We also use the same cost code to record our purchases. So it's important for us to give QuickBooks Online instructions on how to handle both types of transactions. The instructions here are: QuickBooks Online, if you see this product or service on a sales transaction, which is an invoice, a credit memo, or a sales receipt, that should be mapped to income. Makes sense. We invoice our customer, that should show up as income on our profit and loss. However, if I use this item on a purchase transaction, so a purchase transaction is an expense, a bill, or a check, I need you to map it back to this expense account. Now, expense here is really almost always cost of goods sold. And in this example, I have a setup where I have all of my cost codes detailed out on as my cost of goods sold accounts on my chart of accounts. That is a little bit unusual of a setup. Some people like that. For this example, I'm just going to say that we have a standard set of cost of goods sold accounts set up on our chart of accounts. So I could map this right back to cost of goods sold. But what I can't do is map this specifically to a cost of goods sold account called materials or a cost of goods sold account called subcontractor, because this item could be used for either of those things and I don't want it to be wrong. So if I want to be able to map to detailed subcontractor and materials accounts, then I need to have a product or service in QuickBooks for materials and for subcontractor, so that for my materials product or service item / cost code, I can map it right back to either a framing materials if I have that much detail, or a cost of goods sold account called materials. I should mention here that if you are a speculative builder or a completed contract builder, you may instead be mapping back to asset and liability accounts, but most contractors are going to be mapping to income and cost of goods sold accounts for their product service items. What this means on the QuickBooks side is that when I'm entering any bills or expenses on the QuickBooks side, which is an option that I have to make sure that I am using the item details section to record these costs. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to choose a product or service because these are my cost codes. And I would put in the amount, and then I would choose the customer project, and make sure that when you're choosing the customer project that you are choosing the correct level depending on what your customer integration settings are. So in this case, the actual project is this called Residence James Fox. If I record a job-related cost to a category like materials, or in this case, it's a little confusing because my cost of goods sold accounts are actually all detailed out. If I choose a category and I put the customer job here, it will show up in JobTread, but it will show up on my budget as an uncategorized budget line item because JobTread does not see the category, it only sees the products and services. Back over in JobTread, believe it or not, we actually have yet another option. This is not used very often, but if you click this little tiny eye right here in our integration settings, in our product and services mapping, in our product services mapping integration settings, we will expand the types. And what this allows us to do is to keep our job costing very simple in JobTread. So we can just have one budget line item for framing. But if I still want that detailed cost account mapping over in QuickBooks Online, I can actually expand this to say, okay, JobTread, if the cost item type, the cost catalog item type is materials, then I want you to please map this back to framing materials. Or you could even have a drastically simplified cost code list, products and services list in QuickBooks that matched your cost of goods sold accounts, like just materials, labor, sub. But again, keep in mind, you won't be able to enter any cost transactions in QuickBooks Online. You'll have to enter everything in JobTread. I would want to make sure too that I specified, okay, if it says subcontractor, I need it to go to framing subcontractor, and so on. The reason why I don't normally recommend this is that it adds another layer of complexity into our integration that already has 3 layers of mapping. In other words, we're already mapping our catalog items to our cost codes, and then our cost codes back to our products and services. And now we're also leveraging the cost item type. And it's important then that the cost item type associated with the catalog item is correct, that the cost item type of the cost item that was put on the budget is correct, or we could be having serious accounting problems. So with that said, this is a really fun setup if you very specifically want to keep your job costing simple in JobTread, but tease out the account mapping in QuickBooks Online. Just keep in mind that you must be very cognizant and aware and careful about the cost item types that your catalog items are mapped to. I hope you found this lesson helpful. If you have any questions, contact support@jobtread.com.